So we know that technology always outpaces law. And I think that that will only increase as we see technology just really exponentially go so far ahead. So thinking about what those challenges are, that's what I end up working on a lot. And so that's one reason why people say, oh, you're like a futurist because you predicted this. It's like, I just read the news.
I'm Hal Marcus.
And I'm Memme and Hal.
And this is Meeting of the Minds, the legal AI podcast from Evisort.
We interview lawyers, professors, and legal operations pioneers that are pushing the envelope.
Leaders using technology to drive great business outcomes and shape the future of the profession. Memme, how's it going?
It's going great.
Remind me who we're talking to today.
Well, today we've got a special one. We're talking to Debbie Reynolds, who's the founder, CEO, and Chief Data Privacy Officer of Debbie Reynolds Consulting. And she's also the host of the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast.
Fun fact about that podcast, that's pretty much what we were going to call our podcast. And then it turned into this whole fight over, like who was the bigger diva, Memme or me. And we decided not to go there.
Yes, well, I guess today it's going to be the three divas, so we should be fine with that. And I'm really excited about our conversation because we talk so much about contracts and AI in this podcast, but today we're really going to dive deep into data, which is so important on both angles of this and can provide huge opportunities or risks for folks. So excited to take this different angle.
And I love how she told us that data is the food of AI. If data be the food of AI, play on.
Amen. And without further ado, let's dive in.
Debbie Reynolds, thanks so much for joining us here on Meeting of the Minds, the Legal AI podcast. Really glad to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. And I don't want to date either of us, but Hal and I have known each other since dirt became a thing on Earth. I don't know.
I was trying to figure out earlier how many firms back in your incredible resume it was when I first met you, and I honestly can't place it. I mean, Sun and Shine, Wilmer Hale, Eimer Stahl, Morgan Lewis, who have you not consulted with? Orrick Harrington. It's the AmLaw 100 basically incarnate, and it's just great to be talking to you and getting your expertise on this front.
Yeah, I'm excited to pal up with Memme again.
Yeah, it's always a joy chatting with you and catching up, and you always bring so much wisdom, and we work so adjacently to data privacy in these questions, but it's great to talk with an expert who's living and breathing it every day.
Thank you.
So Debbie, tell us a bit about Debbie Reynolds Consulting and the work that you do.
Sure. So, first of all, they call me the Data Diva. I work at the intersection of data privacy and emerging tech. So I work with companies that are either developing or trying to implement some type of emerging tech tools, whether they're new to it or they're old hats at this type of thing. My background in technology is in digital transformation. So I've been doing that as long as, let's say, back in the day when it was just transformation and there was no digital in it.
Analog transformation, those were the days.
That's right. So yeah, that's my expertise in those systems. So I do a couple things. So I work in standards. So I am the chair of the IEEE Next Connectivity Systems program as it relates to data privacy. And we're doing kind of a labeling program that we're working on. I've been working on that for almost 3 years now. It's very exciting. And eventually that will become like an international standard. That's what we're hoping for. And then I do a lot of speaking and writing. So I do a lot of keynote speaking. I do a lot of writing and speaking on CLEs, talk to some maybe teeny companies that you've never heard of, like PayPal and Coca-Cola and Uber, people like that, around data privacy and technology, especially around AI. I'm doing a lot of talks around that. And then I have my advisory where I work very closely with companies, whether it be stuff on their tools or programs, or did some work with Memme and Evisort in the past on standard contract clauses and things like that, and just general things around emerging tech. So that could be AI and robotics and satellites and apps and stuff like that. So I just get into fun tech stuff.
That's excellent. And I'm curious on your perspective of the last 2 years. It's been about 2 years since Chat GPT 3.5 came out. And I wonder, from a data privacy expert perspective, what has it been like since then? What are the questions you've seen or things you've seen folks deal with, or what's on the horizon?
Yeah. Well, I think it's what ChatGPT did is sort of democratized artificial intelligence, where many companies like your company, Eversort, has been using AI for a long time. So what it did was break AI out of kind of this corporate thing and put it in the hands of just everyday people. And so that got the press excited, that got people excited. Companies who weren't using AI and didn't have data folks and data scientists, they got excited about it. From a data privacy perspective, I think it has raised the temperature on privacy, where a lot of the challenges that companies have had or thought about or had to consider about using AI, data is the food of AI. So that's what goes into AI systems. And so when you're using data, personally identifiable people, their personal data, that just raises the risk of how companies are using AI. And in the past, the way AI governance has gone, it's like we didn't really have to think about it that much because a lot of AI was very purpose built and very narrow in the scope of what it did. Where now you have these kind of everything AI things, so they can do everything. You can throw all types of data in it. So I think what it has done in parallel is kind of raise the visibility of privacy, because it's sort of like eat your vegetables. So you want a cake at the end of dinner, and your mom say, "Well, you can't have it 'cause you to eat your vegetables." So privacy, unfortunately, is like your vegetables you're supposed to eat in the first place. And now you want to do this thing, but now you have to think about governance, which no one really wants to think about, or you want to think about privacy. So I think companies who've been very mature, like Eversort, in that space, you'll just go so much further than other companies where they're still trying to figure themselves out, where you knew that you have to have those things in place.
Sounds like you're saying if you want to use AI in your organization, you've got to have your data in order at the beginning of that. Otherwise, you're expanding the risk of what happens to that data much more broadly. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, totally. I tell them, I was like, that's not for you. Like, if your data house is in order, that's not for you. You can look at it in the window, you can wave at it, but that's about it. That's all I used to do.
No cake for you.
No.
Yeah. I'm curious, are there any kind of foundational principles of data privacy that may have evolved in the last couple of years with AI technology? I think this democratization, getting it in more people's hands, has it made people more reticent? Has it made people more open? What have you seen?
Well, I guess two things are happening. I think people want to use it and they want to throw data at it, but they don't really understand the risk. So they don't understand the risk of, oh, I threw my social security number in this chat thing. And they think, oh, I just get a result. They don't think that their data is going into some huge cauldron and somebody else, if they're smart enough, they can prompt to get that stuff out. And a lot of the bad actors are really good at that. So I think in terms of foundational or fundamentals, I think people are starting to see the risk that they have when they are just throwing their personal data out, like just in the wind, right? So we've seen, like, for example, recently with this national public data breach, where they're like, oh, we think everyone in America's stuff got breached. And they're like, what? So it raises a lot of questions, like, who are these people? Why do they have my data? What can they do with my data? So I think that those types of things, unfortunately, it's not a great thing, but I think it just raises that visibility, and it helps people understand why it's valuable to protect their personal information.
So, Debbie, I mean, I know the age old issue companies are dealing with data privacy is GDPR, CCPA, et cetera. Are you still seeing a lot of that as what companies are struggling with? Are there other issues that are beginning to pop up, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think companies are struggling with the complexity of trying to navigate what they have to do business in all these different jurisdictions, right? So it's like, oh, I'm not in Europe, but I have customers in Europe. So are they in the UK? Are they in the EU? Are they in the EEA? Are they in Canada? Different things. Are they in Texas? Are they in California? So I think that companies are really grappling with that, trying to create. For me, I think it's good that they're creating more of a data strategy, because I think just trying to lurch from one law to the next is just not like a good way to move forward. So you have to create like a data strategy. So what is your principle? What is the foundation? The way that you say, this is how us as a company are going to handle data. And then as regulations come about, you may have to do some tweaks and some adjustments there, but you're not recreating the wheel every time. So yeah, I think those, especially on the state level, we've seen the states take off on privacy, almost like they did with data breach. So, for example, California was the first state. They had a data breach notification law, and by like 2019, all states had them, but they're all different. And so, data breach is a patchwork, and it's very annoying for companies who have breaches because they have to deal with that on a state by state level. And so, what we're seeing in privacy on a state level is like the same thing happen. Where California capped the CCPA, and all these other states have kind of tried to have their own thing, but then every state wants to be different. They want to have their special thing. And so now I say it's like barbecue, like the Carolina barbecue versus like Kansas City barbecue. So now we have like the California privacy laws, the Virginia type laws and stuff. So it's really interesting to see how that plays out. But I think it just creates more complexity and just more challenges for companies. So yeah, people are still struggling with, hey, should I use this standard contract clause for this? We're doing business in this thing. How does CCPA play in that? So it's still very complicated. I mean, literally, I was working with a client today and who does like clinical trials around the world. And so it's just bananas in terms of just doing that contracting.
So, is there enough common ground among the state laws in your view? Because you're talking about setting a set of principles, a policy within an organization so that when the next law pops up, you're not caught off guard. But is there enough common ground that you can do that and then not have things derailed when the next legislation you need to comply with emerges?
I think there are a couple of just basic things that companies need to think about. So if you do these basic things, you'll be part of the way there. I'll say more than 50% there. So first of all, people have rights. That's the number one thing. So people have rights to know what you're doing with their data. They give it to you. So that transparency has to be there. You have a obligation to secure that data. So that encompasses some privacy, data breach, some of the cyber laws, depending on what jurisdiction or what sector that you're working in. You need to make sure that people can opt out of things. So obviously there are things that you need to collect about someone just to provide them a service, but a lot of the challenges or a lot of the things that people get upset about are kind of that third party data sharing that happens with companies, whether they're selling it or they're trying to advertise. And obviously, people are upset because they're like, hey, these companies are making like billions of dollars off my data, but I'm not making anything. But they don't have visibility to what that next step is. And that's like vitally important, especially as people now, more people than used to, are reading the terms of service, reading the privacy policy, reading the user agreements and stuff like that. They really want to know, if I give this company my data, what are they going to be doing with it? So if companies are being transparent, make sure people, they're giving them information about what they're going to do with their data. So that data purpose is really very important. Making sure they secure their data. And then I always talk about kind of the end of life of data. So data has a life cycle. It has a cradle to grave thing it's supposed to. But what privacy laws have done that probably no other law had done up to this point is that it creates obligation for companies not to keep stuff forever. And that's what companies have always done. So they never had any reason to delete stuff. So back in the big data days, companies were like, oh, big data is great. So we collect all this data, but now they have all this junk that they can't really do anything with, and it creates more risk. And unfortunately, a lot of them now, they're trying to throw a lot of this junk into AI. And it's like, you just can't throw junk into AI and then think you're going to get a diamond out the end. So it has to be really good data that you get in. I say, instead of garbage in, garbage out, I say garbage in, junkyard out, because AI has the capability to really create just a volume of data, like way more than what you put in. So it's not like a one for one type of exchange.
So you've talked a lot about how AI is exacerbating the risk of data privacy exposure. Are you seeing applications for AI? And obviously, this is something we focus on. I don't mean this to be a soft setup, but what are you seeing in terms of the use cases of AI, creative or otherwise, in furtherance of data privacy protection?
I am seeing companies try to incorporate more AI into their tools where like maybe they have an existing tool, they want to have some type of capability that helps companies find an easier way to really filter things or find things or categorize things. And to me, that's like the best that you could ask for with the use case with AI. And obviously we're seeing a lot of growth in like the privacy enhancing tech world where they know that a lot of companies, you don't necessarily want to have to take your data and put it into a new bucket. You want to be able to have something that can maybe scan or search or help you categorize the data where it is, maybe in place, so that you can make decisions about it. So I'm really excited, especially companies like Eversort. You guys aren't paying me to make this plug, but you are really early on figuring out that really AI can be a huge switch arm in life, especially in contracts. Because contracts have been like bananas for years. I remember, I think I told Memme this story a long time ago. I remember where someone, you weren't signing a contract, someone would fax you the end page of it, and someone would sign it, and then nobody could find the end page, when you're looking for it. So it was just, it is a industry or a task that was very ripe for disruption. I'm glad you guys walked into that.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, and I mean, compliance can vary so much in every industry, right? When I think of like finance, I think of like DORA compliance, where you need to know all this information about your vendors and whether or not they have the SLAs in place, their uptime percentages in place and such. And you can even audit them. But a lot of that is kind of trapped in documents and kind of contracts and such. And so just to the extent that these kinds of business documents and transactional agreements and such are important to managing data privacy, would just love to dive a little bit deeper.
Well, I guess people need to know these aren't things that are gathering dust in like a file cabinets. So these documents really are laying out how you're really gonna manage data. Like, what are you gonna do to protect it? What are you gonna do to transfer it? When a breach happens, what are you gonna do? So these are kind of living documents that companies need to reference a lot as they're doing their work. So it can't be, all right, we sign it and then we forget it or whatever, or file it somewhere. Especially the EU regulations, they are very, very specific on how things are written in contracts, and they want to make sure that people are following that. So a lot of their regulations are, hey, be very specific about what you're going to do with X. Hey, I'm John, I'm going to take this box from point A to point B, and then when this happens, I'll do that, right? And so, in my view, we haven't seen kind of that level of detail in contracts for a really long time. And then depending on what party, third party contracts. So there are obligations there for them that are beyond kind of what people typically consider a service, especially as it relates to data. What I call a data handshake, where they say, okay, we're handling this data together. You have to do this part, and then you have to do this part. And that's part of service to a person. And that's probably something new to some companies where they always felt like, oh, as long as I provide this product or service, then it doesn't really matter what happens with my data. And we know that that's not the truth. And so we're seeing a lot more, addendums to contracts. We're seeing a lot more people use these data processing agreements. We're seeing a lot more standard contract clauses or different things that are attached to contracts about the actual things that people should be doing with data.
So you're talking about using the contract not just as a way of like protecting yourself by virtue of having the right protective language for compliance purposes and shielding your liability, et cetera. You're talking about actually using language in the contracts to enforce compliance, enforce good practices on the suppliers, the business partners, the data handlers, the processors that you work with and that support your business.
Totally, yeah, right. Because some contracts, literally, I was working on one today. They'll say you have to have a particular like organizational measure or technical measure that you have to have in place to be able to protect your data. And if asked, you may have to produce some documentation to show that you've done that. So whether that be, let's say, a security policy or a policy around how you handle like firewalls or different things, or how you manage breaches. What would you do in a breach? Almost like a fire drill type of thing. So we're seeing a lot more of that in contracts where a lot of that detail was probably never there before.
I'm reminded of working with construction companies where they have to now get all the contracts that their subcontractors have with their subcontractors, and then all of the insurance policies too. And it just can really explode the amount of kind of documents and things that need to be reviewed. But at the highest level, you need to know even if you have the rights to get those from everyone, and that's a web in itself. I can see how things can get pretty complex in this space pretty quickly.
It's very, very challenging, right? Because especially around third party, I think third party contracts, third party data sharing, like someone has called it like the third rail, the third rail of contracting, the third rail of advertising. And we know all of us are involved with third parties because we can't do everything ourselves. So making sure that that third party relationship is very strong and making sure that everyone knows what their part is to play, especially as it relates to data, is very important. And that's probably something we haven't seen in the past.
Yeah, it seems like it's compounding now. There's more and more third parties to provide any more basic service, and they're outsourcing to more and more other kinds of tech embedded in their solutions. So when one of those links has a problem, it just runs through the whole system. We've got all of these points of potential failure. And I think that that gives a lot of organizations pause about, well, we can put this language in our agreement, we can implement this policy, but how can we actually be confident that right down the line, all of these suppliers and vendors and third parties and SaaS products and everything else, and now AI vendors that we're leveraging, that we've got all those same protections in place?
I guess two things come to mind. One is I'll tell companies like, don't try to have your third party do something that you wouldn't do, that you couldn't do, right? And then you have to be able to walk. It was like climb to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro 12 times or something like that. Nothing just ridiculous. And then also the purpose of these contracts, the reasons why they're getting more specific is that they want to make sure that companies can walk their talk, basically. So you can't just say you're going to do something or say you can do something. You have to actually be able to demonstrate. And so if someone calls you out on it, you have to be able to show that you can do that. So that's part of what the contracting experience should be.
Debbie, switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about how your firm is now offering AI audits for folks. I've heard about more compliance and traditional audits that are out there. When it comes to AI compliance, we at Everso, we're actually the first in the CLM space, one of the first in the world to get an ISO 42001 certification, which is around responsible and ethical AI. And so I'm curious, and I'm sure other folks might be, on what these AI audits consist of and then how they differ.
First of all, congratulations. It doesn't surprise me. You guys have been early out of the gate with a lot of stuff. So I think what you're doing will be a guiding light to other people for sure. I would say when I think about AI audits, for me, it really centers around the risk and the harm to humans. So thinking about that in your systems, like what are you trying to do with AI? How are you using the data? I always tell companies we need to think about data provenance. So a lot of lawyer people talk about provenance. So provenance meaning, do I have a legal right to have this data or to use this data? But then with AI, you have to think about lineage. So where did the data come from? Where is it going? What are you doing with it? And what happens at the end of life? Because all data has a life cycle. So I think what AI governance is doing is definitely bringing a lot of those things to light. So obviously there's kind of the technical part, but even as we see jurisdictions like the EU with their AI Act, things like that, they're really focused on like the harm to humans. So if you're doing something with AI, you're not collecting someone's personal information, you're not trying to like make decisions about them in some way, nobody cares about that. So no one's going to come knock on your door, kick your door down because you did that. They are going to be very concerned if you're saying, oh, well, we think this person should go to jail because X, Y, Z. I'll say, okay, so who decided that? I don't know, like the algorithm said that. Like, that's not going to be okay. That's not like an answer. So being able to really understand that what these jurisdictions are really looking for is to have humans in the driver's seat AI is not making decisions, but maybe helping you to do the heavy lifting. Kind of, I feel like this maybe the second renaissance of technology, where maybe the first was just going online, the internet and stuff like that. And then this is like, okay, we're going to like the next level where now we're having people are talking about agentic AI, like agents to do stuff for you. And maybe that's okay. They get like, they buy groceries for you, but they shouldn't be like, oh, who's gonna work on this shift or whatever. So trying to think about AI uses that are more kind of low stakes and low harm and low risk. I think it should be really there. I know I hear a lot of people say in a regulation space that if you regulate or you're trying to create these rules or standards, you're gonna stifle innovation. And I don't really believe that. It's sort of like the analogy I give is stoplights and stop signs and line paint on streets didn't stop innovation in the car industry. So we can get some guardrails, we can get some guidelines to be able to really streamline the way that we use it. And then in that way, we can really make it something that can truly help people. You shouldn't be hurting people with this technology. So that's the goal. And that's the reason why those types of audits are really important.
You make a really good point about the importance of use cases. About a month ago, we were at the ACC conference, which
Association of Corporate Counsel.
Yeah. So the ACC annual meeting brought together a couple of thousand, at least, corporate counsel. And a lot of the sessions, unsurprisingly, were around AI. And it was just fascinating to talk to people in the room and hear their reactions, breakouts and such, because so often there were concerns around, well, you're asking me to use AI for this very risky thing. That's greatly concerning to me, even as people on the panel are way ahead and talking about these advanced use cases. And it seems to me that most of the risk they were getting caught up in falls into what is the use case and what is the data that's going into delivering the answer. If you're using the AI to create an answer that you're going to bet everything on without human supervision or validation, that's very risky. If you're using the AI to make a decision for you or even suggest a course of action based on the totality of information out on the internet, the enforceability of a term or the likelihood of litigation over something, again, very risky. If you're turning to the AI to guide you on what's in your data and it can point you to the sources, very reliable, even if there is an occasional mistake. It is not going to derail anything if you've got the validation and you're basing it on good, reliable internal data, especially if you're using things like RAG to help create better accuracy. I'm off my soapbox, but I'm curious for your perspective on that. Does that ring true to you?
Oh, yeah, totally. I know because when a lot of these more commercial tools came out, like I'm a data nerd, and so I like to mess around and see like what I can do with things. I try to push technology to its edge and see how far I can get. So before like RAG became a thing, when I figured out I could do that, I was like, oh yeah, I could do this. You know, I knew I could play around with it. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see. It's so funny. So I'll make a parallel here. And I think Hal's going to crack up when he hears this. But this is like when the legal folks started looking at like predictive coding e-discovery. So people are like, they thought, oh, well, we don't need lawyers anymore because this stuff is going to do everything. It's like, no, that's not how it works. And so I feel like we're telling people the same thing. Instead of like the evil robot and like the robot is going to do everything, it's like, okay, this thing can help you, but it really isn't equipped. Does not have a brain. It's not wise. It doesn't really understand things. But if you tell it to do certain things within a certain parameter, it can do that. And it can help you in a way that maybe you weren't helped before, help you do some maybe low level task that gives you time to do this other high level thing. So I don't think AI is going to be an easy button by any means, but it certainly will for people who find the right use cases and people who have the time to really learn how to leverage the tool correctly. It's going to be extremely powerful.
I did hear from one GC who was telling me that her CEO called her into the office one day and said, I'm going to replace you with GPT. And she was, excuse me, it's like, give me 3 questions. I'm going to ask GPT. And if they're all right, then that proves it. So she came up with 3 questions for GPT and he got the answers. And she said, well, the first 2 were kind of right, but there's nuance. And the third one was actually completely wrong. But she was so put off by this whole experience and the tone that the CEO was taking. And she should be. But at the same time, I found myself thinking, yeah, but see, at the end of the day, he needed you to tell him whether it was right or wrong.
That's a good one. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I just can't believe some of the stuff I've heard, especially from the people who aren't really in the trenches and don't really know the data really well. So they kind of believe in the hype, like, hey, I don't need you shiftless humans who get sick and have kids that have to wait, pick up from school when I can have this cool GPT or AI do that. And we know it just doesn't do that. You still need a human. And I think especially with the volumes of data that are coming off AI tools, you just can't replace a human. I don't know, back in the day, I started my career in like library science. I don't know if you knew that. Back in the day when they had card catalogs and libraries, I was turning that into like databases and stuff. And so I think what we're missing is kind of that curator, that librarian, the person that the data will run through and say, hey, this is good, this is bad. Like right now, we just have so much data, so much information, and we don't have that person who can kind of curate and like tell people the right way the things need to go. So I think in your example, that woman, she's like the master curator. So she can tell you, okay, this is right, this is wrong, this is missing a nuance, it needs to do like this. So we need to bring back kind of those curators.
I'm curious also about, we're talking about what folks shouldn't do, but I'm curious about what folks should do to kind of make their data privacy programs more mature. If you have any advice from your consulting experience.
Sure. I would say the first thing, a lot of times I talk to clients, they're like very hair on fire. So they see like these reports like, oh, 21 states have laws. And they're like, oh my God, how am I ever going to catch up with that? So a lot of it is just sort of calming down and figure out, first of all, what data do you have? Do you even have data that's subject to this? Are you subject to this jurisdiction? Do you have customers in this area? Are you doing these high risk things? So just really triaging what their issues are, high, medium, low is really important. Maybe they have something on their wish list where they want to kind of get to that maturity. I think that's really important. And then also understanding that they're not going to be able to get around privacy. So whether that be, not all issues that companies have are around regulation. We're seeing, especially like in the car industry, some car companies are getting slammed because of the way that they're handling data in a way that customers don't like. So I tell these companies, are you going to lose $1 to make a dime? So are you going to sell people's data so then they don't want to like have brand loyalty and buy a car from you or different things like that? So I think companies, they need to really think about not just regulation, but what their customers will really want. And those things aren't about regulation. It's about kind of that customer relationship and then figuring out like where their gaps are. So not everything, you don't have to boil the ocean to be able to do privacy right. You just have to figure out what are your particular privacy issues? What are your hot buttons? What are the things that are very top of mind to you and your customers? And then you start there.
So with that in mind, let's talk about industries for a minute. You've got healthcare, for example, where you've got very specific needs with HIPAA, with high tech. You've got FinServ, where you've got a whole range of needs, Graham Leach Bliley and others. Do you feel like the same principles apply and it's just different language and agreements and a few other different practices? Or do they really need very specialized guidance and instructions and use of tech?
That's a great question. I think there are some similarities around those industries, like a thread that they can think about. And I think that thread is really the human. What data are you collecting? What data do you have of humans? And so thinking of the fact that these industries do handle data of humans, and if something should happen to that data, there is a harm associated with it. And that's why those industries are probably more heavily regulated than other industries. But then you add on to that, now we have all this new technology. So now you're doing things with data that you never did before, that you never could do before, probably not thinking about the ways you need to change or kind of up your game as a result of that. So thinking about, let's say, like HIPAA came out in the 80s. So in the 80s, we didn't have Fitbits and watches that track your heartbeat and stuff like that.
How did we survive back then? What did we do?
I don't know. I think we read books.
I can't remember now.
Right. So we have people who are using their thumbprint to clock in or clock out for work. And so these are brand new problems that we're having by the virtue of the fact that we have so much digital stuff around us is collecting information. And so you can't use your 1980s brain and think about our problems today. So you have to kind of update yourself about what you're doing with data, how you're collecting data. And you're probably collecting data that you never collected before because now the technology is doing things that you could never do before. So I think thinking about that technology layer and how people are using data in different ways, I think they need to really think through how that makes it different in different industries.
So, with that in mind, let's skip ahead 5 years. Are we going to be having the same conversation in 5 years and it's just more kinds of data? Or will there be some radically different kind of challenge that's appearing in data privacy?
So I work a lot in emerging tech. I'm a futurist, so I work a lot of stuff that is being dreamt up now that isn't existing now. And so there's just so much more stuff that it will be collected that was never collected before. So it's so funny. So I had a call with a guy who's with like one of these 3-letter agency type guys, and they tell you stuff and then you want to go home and like close your curtains, right? See what I'm saying? Like, oh yeah, your phone. If your phone is in your room and it's off, it's still recording. I was like, damn it.
If your phone is turned off in your room, it's still recording?
Yes, that's what he told me. So I mean, when you see that, you're like, oh no, I want to like close those blinds and like lock the doors and go into a wilderness and be off the grid and all some other type of stuff.
I think I want to get a lead covered box now that you told me that.
Right. Exactly. But I think the technology is advancing like so rapidly. And so my concern is that people don't understand what's happening with it, right? So they don't understand what their rights are. They don't understand what the data is being collected. The companies that want to adopt these technologies, they're excited about it, but they may not know, okay, when you're taking on these new technologies, you're taking on more data, you're taking on more risk. Like from a contracting point of view, you may have to edit your contracts because it may create more obligations for you and your third parties around how they're handling that data. So I think those are all concerns you have to think about.
While we're winding down, we work a lot at the intersection of legal teams and procurement teams and teams all across the organization. I'm curious what you've seen when it comes to companies that might struggle with aligning on different data privacy initiatives and any recommendations you have for folks dealing with that.
I absolutely do. So I think my advice I would give to companies is that what you do with privacy, you want it to be operational, not aspirational. So you don't want to be like, oh, we wish we could do this, or oh, it'd be great if we delete data every 2 days. Like that's not real. You're not going to do that. So you want to come up with policies, procedures, things that you can put in place that are doable and that you can evidence that you're actually doing those things. So walking the talk is very important. And so you don't have to twist yourself in a pretzel to be able to comply with whether it be regulation or whether those be the kind of those data strategy principles that companies put together. So the point is not to have companies be like constrained with what they have to do. It's just letting them know they need to be responsible and they need to be accountable and they need to be able to make sure that people can, for example, opt in, opt out. They have to be transparent about what's happening with third parties. As they're updating technology, they have to update also their contracts and what their obligations are to different people. So I think being cognizant of the fact that, especially with the rapid pace of change of technology, I don't know, like years ago, I remember when you have a software tool, it may not even have a major update for a couple of years. And so now, like every few months, or maybe every 6 months, 3 months, 2 months, there may be a major change in a tool that you're already using. And so companies really need to think hard about what are we doing new that we weren't doing before? What are we, even though you're excited, I feel like technology is like a double-edged sword where it can do great things or bad things, especially if you're adopting them too fast. You want to make sure, don't get so excited about the good things that it does and where you're not really thinking about the risk side of it. So there has to be a balance there. And so if companies really think through how that changes, whether that is how they're collecting data, the data they're collecting about people, what they're doing with data, and making sure that kind of that data chain all the way from them as a first party, to third, fourth, and fifth, and sixth parties are doing what they're supposed to do, I think that's what companies need to look at.
Debbie, so many people have moved. In fact, we just did an interview recently on the podcast with someone who moved into the role of global DPO after coming through the ranks as a lawyer in different kinds of roles. We saw so many people, you mentioned predictive coding before, so many people in e-discovery started shifting over to cyber. That became the new focus. So for someone entering this space, someone who's in an earlier phase of their career, maybe has a legal background, maybe has more of a coding or cyber background, maybe neither, and they're interested in getting more focused in a career path in data privacy, what advice do you have for them? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, two things I always say when people ask me that. One is find people online who are like posting really good information that you can follow and learn from, because we tend to be a very giving community of people. We like to share information. We like to help one another. So do that. That will definitely help. But then I always advise people to look at the news, look at the technology that's coming out, because whatever technology is coming out, I always think, oh, wow, like what would be the privacy implications of that? The robot nanny that came out. I'm like, oh, wow, like that's talk with a bunch of issues that I can think of from a privacy perspective. And so when you're thinking about that, eventually those problems will hit your desk. So we know that technology always outpaces law. And I think that will only increase as we see technology just really exponentially go so far ahead. So thinking about what those challenges are, that's what I end up working on a lot. And so that's one reason why people say, oh, you're like a futurist because you predicted this. It's like, I just read the news. I'm like, oh my God, this thing came out. Like, we need to think about what those challenges are. So if you're thinking about technology, because that's where a lot of privacy problems come. So privacy issues come from collecting and retaining data. And so if you're doing any of those things, you have privacy issues. And so you have a lot more technology that's there that can collect data, that can retain data. And then what you do with it in terms of transferring and sharing it creates those risks. So if you're thinking about those things, then you're going to be in a good position to be able to really leverage whatever skills you have in that direction.
Well, technology outpaces law, but Debbie, you're outpacing all of us when it comes to staying ahead of these data privacy issues and opportunities. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to see you, gentlemen.
Meeting of the Minds, the Legal AI podcast, is brought to you by Eversort. To learn more about Eversort and how we can help you contract better with AI, visit Eversort, EVISORT.com.
You can find Meeting of the Minds on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to click subscribe so you won't miss future episodes.
On behalf of everyone here at Eversort, thanks for tuning in.